have a question, just for my information, is what, in listening to the conversation, that it sounds like that the PDAs offer some things that are really appealing to the developers, and we know that we need the developers. So I'm really interested in what it is that a PDA offers to developers that makes that appealing to them and helpful to them. And I also want to know in a PDA what the role of the community or what the role of the citizens are, or if there is a role. So it's a two-part question.
Do you want me to take a crack at that one? I'll start with the second half of that, is that the role of the citizens doesn't necessarily have to be different with any of these approaches, and that's something that I think we need to talk about a little bit more, and the ad hoc committee talked about that in their meeting as well, about should we have a CAC associated with the new CRA, and if so, what function would they play, and a CAC could also be used with a PDA if that was how we wanted to set it up collectively. Regarding some of the benefits of the PDA, I think PDAs are really good for specific projects, for specific development projects, because they give you the legal authority to enter into joint ventures in ways that are more difficult to do for a public sector body. And I think if we're going with a boundary that's the big blue boundary, a PDA might make sense for smaller areas within that and for specific projects within that, that can bring the developer together with the public sector. But doing a PDA on the large boundary has some challenges. It's not unworkable, and it does bring some additional benefits in terms of flexibility, but it's a little bit of a broad focus for a typical PDA.
And I just want to really briefly add the question. I don't want to lose momentum on this, but one of our conversations in the ad hoc committee was a desire to continue to have a citizens advisory committee or some kind of an advisory committee, even with the council option. But I want to underscore, in terms of what Lorelei is saying, I mean, part of this is, I think, fostering quality development, is figuring out how we do this in a really truly complementary way that's consistent with our comprehensive plan and brings people together around things. So, the concept of having a focused PDA for a specific project, that could emerge from this and could be the kind of continuity that would make a specific project more attractive for investment. So I think there's an evolutionary nature to to our conversation, our dialogue. We're sort of, in some ways, we're inventing as we go. And I think that's a healthy thing for this community to do, because I feel like if we're collectively inventing this, it's going to have a little bit more resilience and durability, and we're going to smooth out this conversation around how do we do quality development in the downtown. So I know we had Jerry and Alan that wanted to weigh in on this topic.
I think it makes sense initially to keep the governance within the city council, but am I to understand that conceivably within the broad city council governance for large defined CRA, that within that you could also at a later point amend the ordinance and have a PDA for a specific project? You can have the larger governance and the specific. And the other part of that is that I presume initially in the ordinance you have to specify your area. Yes. But that is also subject to revision as time goes on. What are the restrictions on that?
So yes, you can amend your plan after it's been adopted, but you effectively have to go through the entire adoption process a second time and adopt an updated plan. So it is possible, and provided that there's good solid political will and community support for the changes that you want to make, it can move forward, but it's not without its risks and without its hassles. And I don't believe that you would need to, don't quote me on this because I'm not a lawyer, but I don't believe that you would need to amend your plan to form a PDA that was specific to a project within your community renewal area. I think it would be a separate body that was separate from the community renewal plan.
So that initially, if you have a broad area defined as your area, then you have this set of tools in your tool bag for that broad area.
Correct.
Without further specific process for.
And through the process of implementing your community renewal plan, it might become evident that you need a PDA for a particular project, and then that could be formed as a separate entity at that point.
Well, Jerry, it's good to hear you thinking this way, because that's exactly the thinking that we engaged in as we were deciding on the boundaries. So I think we're right in thinking the same way about that. Because of the difficulty of trying to establish a CRA in different areas is very different than having a PDA in a particular spot.
Yeah, I think the answer to Jerry's question answered my question, but I do agree with Paul and the others that have spoken that the big blue line is a good line for the PDA, for the CRA, and the idea of having PDAs established once we're looking at specific areas within the big blue line makes sense to me also.
Do you mind if I just share yours? I just have a quick question. I don't recall seeing the port included in the geographic boundaries in the past. What was the thinking on that? Why is that included now?
Opportunity for partnership. We haven't had a direct conversation with the port yet. I mean, that's part of the evolving nature of the dialogue. In our last ad hoc committee, we went back and forth in terms of the options and opportunities of different sites, and where we landed was that there could very definitely be opportunities to work with the port, and there was no reason to exclude them. And in fact, the passage of a CRA for the city actually gives us some authority and powers that are more similar to a port authority. So we actually gain a certain level of parity as a municipal corporation, and the city, definitely has land use authority with the port. So it was just an opportunity for a partnership. Mike.
I'll try to answer from a port perspective on that as well. I look at this, and maybe our attorneys may have a different feeling on it, but from my perspective, I see no harm in the port property being included specifically for the reasons that the mayor contemplated there or articulated there. I don't feel that there's really any sort of threat that the port would feel by being included. I don't think that the scenario of one public entity condemning another public entity's property is real, so that is just gone from the table. So really the primary reason for inclusion is just to have that ability for partnership, and I think we look at that as a positive. So.
One of the concerns we heard early on, from particularly some people who own property, is concern, what does it mean to be included in the community renewal area, and is it any way a negative connotation with regard to their property? So one advantage of the broadest possible area is that it diminishes that. We're not saying that all of these places within these boundaries are blighted, but some are. So I think it insulates the property owner from being swept up in a generalization that is unfair. Just perhaps one advantage of the broader sweep.
Well, in fact, I would argue it's just the opposite. Actually, that what this does is it opens up opportunities for property owners to partner with another partner that otherwise wouldn't be available.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we've heard that.
Yeah.
And we heard that concern. There is an answer to it, but this is a suspenders and belt answer.
And I just
If
want
you're
to
telling
point
me
out
my
that
block
aspect.
is the one, it's hard for you to convince me that it's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to point out the other side of that coin, which is probably a more accurate point about what it is as opposed to the biases that people have towards words like flight, which of course, isn't a good word, isn't.
Great. Oh, you have your mic on.
Oh, I do.
Mike.
I just back, I think just speaking to the broader of the boundaries, personally, I'm pleased to see the blue boundary as the preferred option. And it's not necessarily just for the opportunity for partnership with the port. I'm actually glad that the reliable steel site is included in there. I think that one of the things that may be beneficial for the entirety of this program and this concept is the ability to have an early success. And I think that the reliable steel, and I'm sort of speaking just off the cuff, but I do think that the reliable steel site might be something where you may have, because of the fact that there is no current ownership group, you're not talking about issues with condemnation, that property has obviously been identified as having some blighting and some development constraints to it. There may be some positives there without some of the challenges that some of the other sites have. So I just think that the inclusion of that site is a wise move.
So Mike, if I can segue off of that, we've spent a lot of time on the first two bullet points, and I'm also looking for input on the preliminary sites of interest and on the condemnation constraints that we've put forward. I think these are also critical areas where we could use some input.
Yep.
Well, I think we had talked earlier about these 5 sites. I think there's general agreement that those are blighted sites. And you're going to use condemnation with some sense of judgment, probably more conservative judgment on it. But you do have a definition that to be available for condemnation, there had to be blighted area. Plus, it had to be 5 years or longer vacant. Don't all these properties not fit that definition of 5 years or longer? So the distinction between the two wasn't all that real. I think.
And the ability to, as I understand it, municipalities do have the power of condemnation now, but it's a narrowly prescribed set of purposes for which you can then use the property. And the CRA gives you a broader range of purposes and possibility of partnering with the private sector. But it's one thing to say that you would have the authority to condemn. The other thing is the ability to pay. You have to be able to pay for these properties. And how does the CRA play into that? Does it provide an opportunity, for example, if there was a private partner interested in an area, can they participate in the financing of the purchase through a condemnation? Or is it a buy and hold? If we had unlimited resources, you could buy and hold and then search for partners, but we don't have those resources.
So I'll take a stab and my colleagues can follow. So that's the dilemma that we're really in terms of, I think, community development for the city, particularly in downtown. We are anything but in a position where we have money to purchase things. So the concept of a community renewal area is attractive because it does give us the mechanism to do private partnerships, partners with private developers. And it opens up the ability to participate in a development in a way that includes private parties. But the other side of that is it also keeps us in a position of controlling and managing the conversation of what kind of development, what's the end product going to look like. Have a joint process of visioning on what the purpose would be of a purchase. What's the end use going to look like? And any kind of development project I can imagine for this area, I mean, that fully uses the potential of the CRA would be a staged development process. And I don't think that any of us are particularly attracted to using condemnation authority as we are to reserving it as a tool of last resort if we're just completely stuck. I think the best use of the CRA is to form a partnership between the public and the private sector to do something. And that's the, and what a CRA again allows for is having mixed uses, so that you could have a retail or a commercial component to a development. The city directly facilitated the planning and preliminary engineering and to actually, you know, put it together. Without a CRA, we don't have that kind of authority. We can only do development for a public purpose. So we can build a park, but we can't build a park that has a retail component. We can, condemn something for a public parking lot, but we can't condemn something to do a public-private development project that would result in creating a museum with a retail facility, or a design-build project around a library that had a private investor as part of the development model. So those are the things that we don't have the capacity to do without CRA. Alan?
As a school board member, I need to point out that there's a couple of spelling errors up there. The Capitol Center building is C-A-P-I-T-O-L, and Griswold's is with a W-O-L-D rather than the A-L. So just change those A's to O's. No, it's O-L. And just a comment, I certainly would.
Slide right now.
No, put it up. I certainly think that Reliable and Griswold's are the part of a CRA that I would see, but because the Isthmus property is already planned for as a park, I guess I'm not sure that I see where those properties would, part of a CRA at this point. I see that more. I mean, purchasing the Capitol Center building would, in my mind, come through a park spawn type of a situation that we've done before. So those are just, but Reliable Steel and Griswold's, I think, are certainly correct properties of interest for a CRA.
There.
Yeah, and it sort of segues off of Alan's point. It's a question, and I don't know for you or the ad hoc committee, but it is a question about the properties that were acquired on the Isthmus. And I went back and I looked at the Foster Pepper stuff, and I couldn't answer this for myself, but you guys have probably talked about it. I can see that once a CRA is created, the city has the authority to acquire properties and turn them around for redevelopment. But, and you've spoken about developing those properties, but can you retroactively do that if you create the CRA after you've acquired the properties? Maybe you're going to acquire them for parks and then you're going to redevelop them. Do the CRA laws work that way? I know in transportation it doesn't always work that way, so I don't know if it's for CRA.
You want to respond?
Well, we've actually asked that question as well of Foster Pepper, and they didn't know either, so that's something that we really need to confirm before we go too much further. Sorry, they're lawyers that are focused on community renewal and development-related legal issues.
And there's another
Unless you've heard back from them in the interim.
No,
Okay.
but I don't. I mean, she didn't say a resounding no. I don't.
Yeah.
I remember that this was. I don't think this is an inhibitor. The property, I mean, particularly when we have, you know, identified an area of interest in, there isn't a legacy of public use. But I think that what is unsettled is what the vision is for developing the isthmus. So,
Yeah, and.
you know, so, and I think part of the challenge here, and I want to emphasize this, I mean, here we are, so I'm going to speak a little bit personally, you know, in terms of my own singular perspective on this. City's just bought 2 buildings that are vacant on the isthmus. We don't have the money to tear them down. There's 4 parcels there. There are liabilities on our balance sheet. We have other property holdings on the isthmus as well, in terms of right-of-way, and we own part of what I call the fountain block, which is all the buildings that are on the block that is just directly east of the fountain, except for traditions.
Traditions and the, yeah, almost, yeah.
So, the city owns property there. We have a bird restaurant on the isthmus. We have we have other businesses, including the yacht club, that are on the isthmus, and one of our, I think, best industries in the whole downtown, Image Source, in the old Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant. Image Source has 43 plus family wage jobs that they contribute to our downtown economy. That's another potential partner. We have sort of there's a lot of, and we have the 9-story Capitol Center Tower plus the 3 additionally associated properties with that building. So it's quite a mix of ownership that's down there. And I would also point out that we have Percival Landing, which is in extremely poor shape, except for the part that we just rebuilt. So we have some development challenges in this area that could, and from my perspective, should over time be fit together and talked about together. How we do that is the question. And looking for ways to approach this through public-private partnerships, where we're being highly collaborative with the private property owners on the isthmus, and looking how to leverage our value and think about the best possible configuration of public-private space down there, to both add value to our commercial landowners and also add value to the public setting and public space. So for my own part, I'm looking for nothing less than extraordinary in terms of this spot, because I think the location demands that. It's this incredible spot. So the point is to try to bring private and public interests together in a collaborative way and say, how can we configure this space in a way that really works the best in terms of the transportation corridor, the best in terms of adding public benefit, the best in terms of continuity and connectedness for Percival Landing to Heritage Park to Tumwater Falls. There's all these different things that I think that we should put on a checklist and say, how do we add value to all these different assets, rather than approach it, as in this piecemeal way.
There's another complicating factor that I would think it's great that the city stepped up and purchased those properties. And there are other investors in that property as well. The county has put up $600,000. The state is about to put up about $200,000. Private contributors are about to put up initially $100,000. And the expectations of that $900,000 is that area is assumed to be park. That doesn't necessarily mean that it could not blend with some other creative use of a capital center site that was not traditional park. But the capital center site, as Stephen has said, is such an important place that it has to be respect the view corridors. It has to be of exquisite quality. It has to be something that the whole community believes is a good use of that area, or at least everybody, not everything, but a large majority believes. And I think it's important that we have a process that thinks that through. And that whatever you do there has to relate well to personal and has to relate well to what happens on what we call the west parcels or the RETA. But some of the funds that have gone into that acquisition are conditioned upon expectations in the
That's
contract.
to be more complicated
Yeah.
than how that bullet, if that bullet's appropriate.
But think of how much better it is that we already own it. Gives you more flexibility if we've gone over that hurdle. But
Rachel?
Yeah, and sort of follow up to these comments and the comment that you made, is that I'm understanding how the CRA is a tool to help us actualize our comp plan. But I guess what I'm not understanding is how the plan for what happens on these sites is determined. And you've talked about a variety of options that could be there, but how does that plan happen?
All right.
Well, that's actually one of the agenda items that comes later in the meeting, is to talk about a couple of different thoughts we have on approach to continuing the conversation and to thinking about different options for mixes of development on different sites and getting to agreement on that so that can then be folded into the community renewal plan. So we could either transition to that now, or we could continue this conversation and come back to it a little bit later.
What do you say? Shall we move to the next topic? So why don't we do that?
Okay.
Yeah. Do you, let's see. Can I throw you off the end of the dock?
Can you throw me off the end of the dock?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, can I just start talking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. It was a little autistic in my response. I was
Yeah,
thinking
that's
far
not
too
right.
literally there. No, you may not throw me off the end of the dock. It's cold outside. So this is moving on to this concept of a design charrette, which is one idea that we had for exactly that, for getting to agreement on what exactly we might be putting into the community renewal plan in terms of different mixes of uses. And the concept is to use you all, the CAC, as a sounding board and bring in some design folks and have a charrette that looks at a number of different options and thinks about it holistically in terms of sort of where the transportation aspects and impacts of these different development approaches, what are the different community benefits that come out of these different approaches, and to try to facilitate consensus on a development plan for the isthmus, and then move forward with integrating that into a community renewal plan. And so the question to you all then is, does that sound like something that would be useful and interesting? And does it raise concerns or issues in your heads? Because I think the piece that is missing in this entire conversation is the specifics of sort of what is it that we're going to be doing and how are we going to be doing it. And the isthmus is a place where we've had so many conversations and where the city has a lot of interest because they own property and where the blight is fairly obvious. So focusing in on some evaluation and some design work of the different options for redeveloping that space, looking at open space, looking at the mix of uses that might occur on adjacent sites, and putting all of that together into one place and using you all to help us understand what the trade-offs are and which seems to be the best approach seemed like a good path to walk down to us. But we wanted to get feedback from you all. Do you have something to add to that?
So I want to emphasize how the ad hoc committee discussed this, that it was not a design charrette process as it was an exercise in building agreement between a group of folks that would be a starting point for a dialogue. So the emphasis was on an exercise for forging agreement around what do we do, and figuring out how to work together in a fundamentally different way with the help of urban planning resources and some design architects. And it was not to come out with a single plan as much as it was to find areas of agreement and potentially coming out with a couple of approaches to how we do the isthmus. If we come out with something that that the group feels is ready for a next level of public participation and process, then we would do that. But the emphasis was on trying to do some trust building, do some work on just exchanging different perspectives and figuring out what might be possible. And again, I want to stress this was an exercise in building agreement for our community and trust building and taking a fundamentally different approach to doing community development. So I want to emphasize that it isn't a design shred in the sense that we are ending with a plan that is we're insisting is being implemented. It is the first level of a conversation between this group. Paul?
Is it a design shred that brings in outside thinking?
Well, the concept that Eco Northwest has sort of given us a very rough draft about was actually bringing in some consultants that were expert in this area and helping groups sort of talk to each other and had some skills in terms of rendering and
We have relationships with actually a couple of different architecture firms, but one in particular that does scenario planning that seems like it would be very relevant to this particular conversation, that facilitation skills for this type of a conversation, but then also, yes, the visualizations associated with that.
I think that's helpful so much, just to get some different ideas from outside the table.
What is the time sequencing between such a process to look at this area and the adoption of the CRA? Does the adoption of the CRA proceed before that, or does it wait for that?
yeah, I think that we've characterized it so far as waiting after that. I mean, the sequence of events here is we're easing into this dialogue and trying to build understanding and agreement about the concepts. We still have a couple other steps to take as a council in terms of moving forward. The next step that we're taking following this meeting is having a work session with the full council. And following that, our next reference point is our council retreat in the second week of January to discuss community development in a much more holistic fashion. That definitely would include the next steps around a community renewal area. So in part, Jerry, we haven't determined what the precise sequencing would be. We're talking conceptually about the next step we would like consideration for and want feedback from you about is would you participate in an exercise of talking about different concepts for developing the isthmus? Yeah, so would you participate in, so it's doing that, and then we'll come back, because we have to have a council level dialogue about what's next, and, but this is purely conceptual at this point.
But to dig deeper on that, the idea is to come together with help of some outside expertise and look at some alternative visions that might be attractive to some or others. But then beyond that, to take it out to the larger community, because this is a particularly of great historical interest in our city. And people will not necessarily have confidence in what 18 folks believe without real opportunity for input from hundreds of folks. And that would be part of the process at the second stage once we sort of do the initial sort through what some good opportunities look like, and then talk to others. Is that what's in mind?
Definitely. So, and that's why I was trying to emphasize that the design charrette is not the traditional approach to a design charrette. This is an exercise and sort of a first step to see what kinds of things, how we might approach development on the isthmus. Following that, there would have to be a much more robust citizen participation process that would fit into the next steps of a community renewal area action plan, if we decided that we were going to go that way. I again, want to go back to the small group meetings that I had. I mean, this is a matter of, I don't think there's anybody that I heard from that, to a person, there's no one that I heard from that told me that they were in love with the way the isthmus looked right now, and they wanted nothing to change. Please do
I know
not
one
change the
person in
isthmus.
town, but I'm not going to tell you the name.
So the deal is that we have, and I use the analogy of the 4th Avenue Bridge. I mean, when the earthquake took that out, people, 98% of everybody said, we got to fix the bridge. I think we've got folks in the community that want to fix the isthmus. The question is how to do it. And there are all these different complexities, but this thing has got to be fixed. And the other thing from my own perspective that has to be fixed is the way we work together on community development. And it has to be done from a position of relationship building and trust building. And you can, you can do as much planning as you want, but until we get to the point where we're just having a fundamentally different kind of conversation going on here, I don't think we're going to go anywhere. Max, you're leaning forward hard into that microphone.
Yeah, I think Mike's in your blind spot.
Yeah. I have no problem with a design charrette, and I actually think it would give a lot of clarity to what's being contemplated. I think that endless sheets of paper and white papers and discussions and so on and so forth, I think we've lost people through the conversation, because I think that a lot of people, that's not how they engage or even stay engaged. So I think a design charrette would be incredibly valuable. I would highly caution, though, that if there are 2 parcels or 2 properties on there, Capitol Center and Griswold's, that are currently privately owned by someone else, I would really recommend that the owners of those properties give full blessing to have a charrette done on their property. I could find nothing more frustrating if my neighbors got together and decided what color to paint my house. So I think you have to bring them in, make sure that they buy in on the potential process, or just focus on the properties that you have complete control over. Otherwise, it will feel like the condemnation scenario might be realer for people than it may actually be. So,
Yes, and that's really excellent feedback. So how many folks want to paint Mike's house pink? So excellent points. So, well spoken, Max, and followed by Chris.
Yeah, I gotta be careful with my words here. I think,
Why?
I don't know, just the one time I'll do it. My concern, I think, we sat in our meeting and I agree, there's no way around the fact that the isthmus, except for apparently one person in the City of Olympia thinks it's okay. I'd love to see it changed. I think Mike brings it, I'm gonna kind of wrangle you into this one here, Mike. I think that what I'm concerned about is we've got this giant blue line that our little robot guy here that brought in reliable steel. And my concern is every time we have this conversation, it seems like those lines mean nothing, and it's just the isthmus. And I think one of the things that we have as advantageous is if we have, now that we've kind of put the reliable steel piece in here, Mike, I think you've mentioned it being, it's a great win. It could be a huge win for the city. It's not a huge lift. I don't think that it's not as contentious as the isthmus. It's not something that's on everybody's mind. And I kind of wonder why is the conversation not drifting from the isthmus. I look at it and I go, we're going to do a design charrette that might become a plan. And we're going to make something contentious as an experiment and see if we get it right. And if we screw it up, it's 5-10 years down the drain. Why not go to reliable steel, give that a win for the community to say, let's do a design charrette on something that isn't as contentious, that should be an easy lift for us, that we all can come together with, mark our stamp and say, hey, we've done something great, and now we can look at that as an example of, now that we've done this thing, and it has this feel and this design, and the city has this now, hopefully an asset instead of a liability, we can move down to the isthmus with some momentum and say, let's do this again, because I think we can make it work. My concern is to make the most contentious and hardest parcel to work with our practice run. It's like going to the bench press and throwing all the weight on and say, let's give it a shot. You know, we gotta lift a bar first. We haven't done that, and now that we have an opportunity to do that, let's. I don't know why it's not. I think it should be something we should consider as a group.
So, and we might go that way. I will submit briefly that I think this is a really important time to hear from all of you. One way or another, this council has got to do something with the isthmus. We own property there, and we don't have the money to do much of anything with it. So one way or another, with a CRA or not a CRA, dragged by our nose into something or doing it consciously, something's going to happen.
And I appreciate that. I think my other things I would submit are, we do own property there. We don't need a CRA for it, for all of it, but it would be nice to have the other parcels as well. And I said this to you before, you can't just say, oh, we made this, we've done this now, we got to fix it. That was a fault that we made, and I think I'm nervous to just keep going at it because we say now we own property there. That to me is not a good enough excuse, because I think that just says, we made this, you did make this decision, and right, wrong, or indifferent, we need to make the best decision for our community, and it might not be working there right now. And I think we have to be okay with saying we made a mistake, and we can move forward. I know that's a hard thing to say, but that's my opinion. I don't think we should be lifting the heaviest piece of property, the most contentious piece of property, as a practice run. I think it sets us up for the possibility to set us back even further is much larger in that piece of property than in other areas of the city. And I think we should at least have a discussion about that, and love to hear, I guess I'm kind of sick of hearing only about the isthmus. There's 6 other pieces of property. That's a huge map. Let's talk about something else if it's worth talking about. I know that we've narrowed in on it, but I'm not certain that that's what we should always be talking about.
Thanks. Chris?
A different direction. I missed a meeting in July. I've been reading everything throughout the summer and the fall, and I don't quite understand the plans. There's something called the Downtown Master Plan, I understand, in the works. Is that totally different from the CRA plan?
So yes, it is. The community renewal plan is very simply the document that you have to put in place according to statute in order to form a community renewal area, and it outlines the activities of the community renewal governing body and the activities that it will undertake. So it defines the implementation steps associated with use of community renewal. The downtown plan is a separate process that's larger in scope and deals not just with public-private partnership issues, but also with public space, transportation, connectivity, design, zoning, all of those types of issues would get wrapped up into a master plan. So it's a bigger umbrella.
Is that plan funded and ready to go next year?
I do not know the answer to that.
Shall I answer that, or do you want to answer that? The downtown master plan? So the downtown,
Go ahead.
okay, so our land use committee chair will correct me if I go down the wrong path. Land use on, is it December 3rd or December 5th? 5th is the Land Use and Environment Committee's committee session about sequencing next stages for the comprehensive planning process, which the downtown master plan is a potential supplement to that, to the comprehensive plan process. So we haven't made a decision in terms of scope and timing of downtown master plan. I think there's strong, I'll give my own assessment. I think there's strong interest in having a downtown master plan. It's a matter of sequencing and timing and scoping. It's a longer process.
So it's not this small group of people, Rob and Carol Richmond, it would involve designers and it would involve...
The downtown master plan? We haven't scoped it yet. I think that the Planning Commission has done great work in terms of thinking through, potential approaches to the master plan. It's a matter of, again, scope and timing and resources.
If we want to have an extraordinary anything, well, we have a lot of them. We've got Percival Landing, we have Hands-On Children's Museum, we have Sylvester Park, we have Heritage Park, we have Capitol Lake. We look at one of the most beautiful Capitol buildings in the country from part of our downtown. We have all of these extraordinary things, but does anybody in this room, raise your hand, think we have an extraordinary downtown? I'm just really making a pitch for, you do, you're happy?
No. I think it's wonderful, but it could be a lot better.
We need to work on it.
Okay, well, this conversation I hope will be continued because I think this town deserves, I don't know where you find the money, Mayor, I don't know where you find it, but a lot of $119 million is a lot of money for a city to have, to work with. And the design charrette or the whatever charrette it is, I don't know how much that costs, but I don't think that the group this group tonight would really have a lot of trouble working together. If we can get our developers back, that could be interesting and fruitful. Anyway, I just would like us to set our sights on taking, I want to say this too, I'm sorry. I think Stephen's plan is the first great thing I've heard since I've been caring about downtown Olympia. I mean, I think it is something that potentially could be a real game changer, but without citizen involvement, I don't think you can have successful public projects without real sincere public involvement. And I don't want to be one of 15 people who gives a green light or a red light to this. That's all I'll say tonight.
So, Teresa, we haven't heard from you.
Well, I listened to Max thoughtfully, and I did have a feeling about what could go wrong if we delay action on the isthmus. That it could be a negative outcome in that the development goes up haphazardly and we didn't have any input. Because my understanding is that consortium that owns the Capitol Center and the small building and the parking lot by the yacht club, that they put in for permits to turn it into a hotel, and they're pursuing that, and they have some opposition, but so I think it's the right time to address the isthmus, because we have some negotiating room with the Oyster House burning down, and all the things are kind of coming together right now. And if we don't, like, if I were thinking, well, I want to develop a hotel, but I haven't spent any money on it yet, I'm more amiable to compromises, like Mike is saying, include them at the table, at the negotiating table. There could be another property to swap out or whatever, but now is the time to negotiate with them and the power that they have because they're the owners. We can't do a hostile stopping of them. Not that we would want to either. So that was one reaction I had to what Max said about just indefinitely putting off the isthmus.
I'm not sure if it's
Thank you. My thought would be to offer a compromise and to do design charrettes. We've got three areas of the city that we're talking about: reliable steel, the isthmus, and Griswolds. And I think that those are all properties that we need to sit around a table and figure out what at the same time. And so that would be my compromise recommendation. And unfortunately, I need to excuse myself. I need to be someplace at 8:30.
Thanks, Alan.
See you again.
Who owns Reliable?
Guys, do my best, and folks can help me with it. I think it's Renee, Mike, and Rachel.
Okay.
in terms of-
Yeah, I also listened to Max and what he thought and said.
Thanks, Alan.
And I think there was really some really strong, good points. But I think I disagree too. I think that the isthmus has been a very contentious property. You drive by and it is in the core of downtown Olympia, and it's getting more and more derelict the more you drive by. Literally daily, it's like, wow, this is getting bad. I think we are crazy not to start focusing on getting the community around what do they agree on with a vision. And keep in mind, just like the brewery project, it's great to do a vision, and it will be important to the project, to the process, But ultimately, if this is public-private, the private sector is going to pony up. So there's going to